Hello everyone, and welcome back to World of Warships Blitz with Terry. Today, finally, we'll get to the British line of battleships. But as you all know, rules are rules, and I'm not going to be using my press account to play these ships because, well, I want to enjoy grinding through the line myself. So, I'm sorry, you will not be getting a Conqueror video or anything like that today, even though I have the ships unlocked there. But this is my personal account, and this is HMS Orion. Orion was, well, a dreadnought. So, for those of you who are not aware, that the dreadnought, the actual dreadnought, which is a premium at tier 3 actually, was an invention by the British. And she was quite, well, how am I going to put this? She made everything else obsolete that wasn't a dreadnought, separating things out into, well, dreadnoughts and not dreadnoughts. And at tier 4 here, we get the Orion, which is often called a super dreadnought. Now, this ship was built before the First World War, and actually has participated in some quite interesting battles. The Battle of Jutland for a beginning, or Jutland for you English speakers out there. But also, while I was researching this ship and its history, I came across another battle that I really found quite interesting. So I'm going to leave a timestamp in the description if you want to skip ahead to the actual ship review. But I found this very entertaining. So we're going to do a bit of an extended history session today. So the particular engagement that I'm talking about, and the Orion was part of this engagement, even though she didn't get to fire anything, was a raid performed by the Germans in the First World War on the British coastline. Now, while everybody on the continent was busy finding out that headlong assaults against heavily fortified positions and machine guns were a bad idea, the British had rule of the sea as was traditional, but the Germans set out to challenge that, because the Germans were building what they call the High Seas Fleet, and they were not quite as powerful and as big as the British, which means, well, the Germans couldn't overcome the British fleet in a one-on-one engagement. So what they tried was to defeat them in detail, which is generally a good idea because nobody likes a fair fight. So they tried to lure out parts of the British Grand Fleet and defeat those as they could. Now, in order to do that, the Germans were conducting raids on the British coastline, and the British actually had to, well, they were both afraid of submarines, and they had to go and position their ships around the coastline to, well, defend in multiple places, which means the whole Grand Fleet was never really in one place. The main of it was up in Scarborough in the north. But what the Germans were doing was prodding the lion. They went and, created some raids on coastal towns. And one of those raids is the raid on Scarborough, Hartlepool and Whitby. Now, I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that correctly. This was cooked up by a certain Franz von Hipper, who was an admiral at the time. And he had a rear admiral, to be more precise, and he had a division of battle cruisers under his command, fast ships, faster than most of the relatively sluggish at the time big battleship dreadnought things. So he set out to shell and bombard some strategic towns along the coastline. Now, the British had figured out how to crack the German codes because they literally just had taken a code book from a sunk or crippled British ship and, well, then figured out what the codes were and were generally very, very good at reading those and decrypting those. There's a little bit of a pattern here. So the British knew that something was afoot. What they didn't know was that Hipper wasn't the only one out there. Friedrich von Ingenohl was the admiral in command of the High Seas Fleet, and he was out there as well, trailing Hipper. So the British knew Hipper was coming, and they sent out Admiral David Beatty to take some ships and try to ambush Hipper when he was going to come back. At the same time, Admiral Jellicoe was in command of the Grand Fleet, north up in Scarborough. the weather was pretty bad, so nobody could really see very much. And the Germans, well, managed to slip past and start shelling these coastal towns. One of them had actually some coastal artillery and started shooting back. Did a little bit of damage to the Germans, but in all, they considered the raid successful. Now, what happens next is the amazing part, because Hipper was on his way back, and he was being chased by Jellicoe and by parts of the Grand Fleet. The Grand Fleet didn't bring their destroyers along because the weather was too bad. Jellicoe Beatty, however, who was further south, was able to bring a detachment of destroyers along. Now, these destroyers actually got into a skirmish with the destroyers that were running ahead of the German High Seas Fleet. Now, Beatty at the time was relatively eager to engage. He was a very aggressive admiral, but von Ingenohl was under command by the Kaiser, by the German Emperor, whatever you want to call him, he was under orders not to risk the High Seas Fleet in an engagement. So he was technically already violating his orders. He didn't get a direct order to support von Hipper. He was out there more or less on his own. So when the first skirmishes started between the destroyers on both sides, von Ingenohl he was afraid that he was facing the Grand Fleet. He didn't know he was only facing Beatty's detachment. If he had known, he could have, because pretty much the whole German High Seas Fleet was there, he could have overcome Beatty's smaller group of ships, and that would have been precisely the move that the Germans needed to even out the odds. So that single decision of von Ingenohl to disengage, and because he thought he was facing a group of a fleet much larger than it was actually there, meant that this particular opportunity went by. Von Hipper had quite some work to do to actually get out of this whole thing, because while he was sailing back towards Germany, both Jellicoe and Beatty were trying very, very hard to catch him. And they almost caught him a couple of times. Some of Beatty's cruisers were engaging the German cruisers, but Beatty's signalman, or chief signaling officer, was making a mistake in how he was signaling, and they all retreated, which allowed von Hipper's cruisers to disengage and get away. And then once von Hipper learned that there was actually an engagement, and he knew that there was a fleet waiting for him in ambush, he was able to evade them as well and get back to Germany. Now, I don't want to put too much into this, but there are often times when a single decision can really change the course of how something goes. Obviously, nobody knows how this could have ended, but this single moment could have very much changed the course of the war and the British engagement on the continent and all those things. So I really found it quite interesting. The way we got to this is because HMS Orion was actually already having her guns trained on a German cruiser, but she didn't fire because the Germans had been hailed previously by the British to find out if they were friendly or not, had recognized the British signal and repeated that signal on their escape. So the British were not sure at the time who they were pointing their guns at. It was raining, it was bad weather and everything. So they didn't fire because, the admiral in charge of that detachment didn't give the direct order to do so. And there another chance was, missed because of communications, because of intelligence, and because of all kinds of other issues. But yes, the Orion didn't actually end up firing her guns at the Germans. She later did so in the Battle of Jutland, but that's a story for another day. So what's the Orion like in the game? Well, she has relatively large guns for starters, so let's actually start with the guns. She has a 343 millimeter caliber main battery, which is quite a bit bigger than the usual 305s that you get at Tier 4 in the other ships. Now, historically, these guns had a relatively low muzzle velocity because they wanted to reduce wear on these things, so they didn't power them up that much, which kind of shows, but we'll get to that in a second. So 29,000 hit points. Not the most, not the bulkiest ship in this tier. The armor is almost more battlecruiser armor, so she's also not the most well-armored ship in this tier. She is, well, not fast. Then again, she's not. Then again, I'm sorry. Her max speed is 21.67 knots out of the box. The Colorado, the American battleship at tier 7, does 21 knots, just to put that in perspective. She's relatively maneuverable in my setup here. And the guns, being a pretty large caliber, actually take quite a while to reload. I think the base reload is somewhere around 22 seconds. They do a very respectable 1000 HE damage alpha. They do also a very respectable 1300 armor piercing damage. But the armor piercing, honestly, is a bit meh on this ship. And this really shows that, well, when you start a battle with her, she actually comes with the high explosive preloaded. And that makes sense, because you're mostly better off firing a high explosive. She has a set of 12 secondaries around the superstructure. They are 102mm secondaries. So they're not doing a huge amount of damage, and they don't have the greatest of range. The AA is actually okay. I mean, you're still not going to shoot down a large amount of things, but she does have some AA. That's actually, again, correct. She did have some anti-aircraft guns retrofitted during the war. And her surface detection with 9.9 kilometer isn't completely terrible either. So all in all, this is a relatively well-rounded ship, reasonably sturdy. Don't give too many broadsides, especially when you're bottom tier and you get shot at by 356 mils. And she's got a very good high explosive with a 12% chance of setting fire. For the elite bonus, I've gone with the main battery traverse because, first of all, her torpedo damage reduction isn't that great to begin with, and the guns are very slow. And I have set her up for maneuverability a little bit, which means that she, even with this, she can still relatively easily outturn her guns. But it gets it up to 4.8 degrees. Coming to the equipment. The turret traverse would have been nice, but I wanted to get these 22 seconds of reload down, and the turrets are reasonably sturdy. I haven't lost one yet to enemy fire, so it's not a huge problem in the survivability, and it does get the reload down a little bit. I have gone with a slightly uncommon setup for this ship. So if you're not super experienced with battleships and you're playing lower tiers and it's kind of your first time, it's completely sensible to go with this damage control. But I wanted, I set up my battleships to be more towards dodging torpedoes, especially that if they are reasonably maneuverable out of the box. So I've got the propulsion mod, which gets her acceleration down, I think, to 17 seconds to full speed, which means I can also slow down a lot quicker. And the third slot, again, if you're new to it and you're not so secure yet with your dodging skills, and you just really want to, shoot at things and sail in a straight line, even though I don't recommend that. Torpedo defense modification does a little bit, and you could go with the elite bonus as well. But for me, the steering gear mod 2 actually makes a lot of sense, which gets us down to a maneuverability setting of 10.7 seconds turn time, which is pretty good for a battleship. And 18 seconds to full speed. My commander is still very new. As you can see, he doesn't have much. Just the first two sets, but he will be with the British line all the way up to tier 10. So he's starting out with the underwater protection, and the torpedo alert is nothing really surprising here. All right, let's take her into battle. All right, we're bottom tier. There's there are carriers in play. There's an enemy Wyoming and another Orion. We've got 2 cruisers and 2 destroyers. Let's go. Playing on Silent Shoal. Nicholas, dangerous ship. And, well, one problem you're going to be facing with the cruisers at this tier with other battleships often is that they're basically having no armor. And they don't even have enough armor to arm your shells. So oftentimes with these extremely low tier cruisers, you end up doing over penetrations, especially the Japanese ones. So we'll see how the high explosive turns out against that. Okay, I'm going to, given that I'm a bottom tier battleship here, so I'm going to move towards that center island here, and so, just so, because I'm not the fastest ship out here, just so that I can switch over flanks if it becomes necessary. If the enemy concentrates on the other side, then I'm not completely out of the battle here. It would have been really nice for one of our destroyers to scout the flank, but well, they apparently like the center island as well. So keeping my eye out on my right, just to make sure that, because something is going to come down this route here, just to make sure that I'm ready when that is happening. And again, you see the high explosive is preloaded. Okay, that's probably as much forward as I want to be at this point. So I'm just going to slow down. And there's a Phoenix. Okay, can we get some shots off? That's about 9 kilometers range, so I don't have the highest hopes. The shells have really nice flat arcs. And we get three hits in. Okay, there's more. There's the whole enemy flank. So there's a destroyer and there's the Kuma as well. Okay, the Isokaze is the first one we need to deal with. How much lead do I need to give? Not quite used to yet how fast these shells are. A little bit more might have been nice. So that's one hit only. Slightly disappointing. We're coming under air attack, but well, it's low tier. Oh, okay, the Nicholas got himself torpedoed by the Isokaze. Oh dear, oh dear. But the Isokaze is making a cardinal mistake. He's broadside on at 6 kilometers to a British battleship. And yeah, that hurts a lot more. Had I hit with all 10, he would have been dead now. He's burning. Gets hit by the carrier again. So I'm just waiting for my damage, for my reload. But the Nicholas actually guns him down with some assistance from us. The enemy carrier drops the Nicholas. And there comes the Kuma. Now this is what I was talking about earlier. Kuma has torpedoes. I am within torpedo range, but let's see how the high explosive does against this thing. Yeah, there we go. High explosive citadel. Because you've got just enough penetration to, well, explode in the citadel. Okay, I'm putting her in reverse because I'm pretty sure the Kuma's got torpedoes out because he hasn't been shooting at me, but he's still giving me a really nice flat broadside. Okay, my guns are reloading, but he's turning, so I'm aiming a little bit lower, and that hurt. And the carrier takes him out. There come the Kuma torpedoes. So this is what I meant with my mobility setup, because now I can just do this and dodge. But okay, so that flank is cleared, but it looks like both of our destroyers died. The rest of our team has decided to scatter, and I'm the only one who's sitting in the middle here. Okay, there's an Orion, a Wyoming, and a Phoenix. I don't want to be shot at by all of them, so I don't want to give broadside. I'm going to need to turn the ship the other way around. Plus there's a Nicholas threatening our cap. Okay, there's an Emerald defending. Yep, the enemy Orion sets me on fire. Don't want double fires. Single fire I wouldn't have extinguished at this point. Surely the Emerald can deal with the Nicholas, right? This is tier 4. You never know what's happening in tier 4. Okay, I'm gonna get some shots out at the Orion because the Nicholas is still too far away. What's that Emerald doing? He's not shooting at him. Is he trying to torpedo the Nicholas? Well, the carrier surely isn't particularly thankful for that because he's eating all the Nicholas's torps while the Emerald is trying to get in range and get his torps away. That's a destroyer you're trying to shoot at. Okay, the Nicholas stops because he probably realized that there's an Emerald shooting at him. And torpedoes him. So now the Nicholas just accelerates again and all these Emerald torpedoes are going to miss. Now he's using his guns. He could have shot him, he could have sunk him with his guns minutes ago. Okay, there we go. So that's one Nicholas down. That leaves the Emerald and me against an Orion and a Wyoming. Not good odds. But let's see what we can do. We just gotta get lucky with a couple of shots at the enemy Orion. Okay, shots out. Turning away a little bit. No fire, so disappointing. He gets fire on me. I need to damage con this because I don't have the health to tank this. Still getting shot at by a Wyoming, and our Karlsruhe has been sunk by a Langley at point blank range. Okay, the Orion seems to be more after the Emerald now, which makes sense because he can sink him relatively easily. And it looks like the Emerald is giving him broadside to get his torpedoes away, which, well, the Orion isn't going to fall for that. He's turning. Look, he figured out how to turn his ship around. Okay, let's see if we can still sink the Orion, but there's only 2 of us left at this point, and I don't have much hope for the Emerald at this stage. Yep, the Orion easily dodges the torpedoes. The Emerald's giving broadside, just taking some shots from the rear turrets there. Now he's turning in again because he's out of torpedo range. Forgets the rest of the guns firing. He's probably has the armor piercing loaded at this point, but yeah, it doesn't matter. The Emerald is dead. So now I'm alone. There's no way I'm going to carry this to the end, because we only have 28 seconds left and I'm relatively low on health, and I've got a Wyoming shooting at me and a carrier, and that Orion is still alive. Yeah, he's shooting armor piercing, I think, which doesn't do the greatest amount of damage. High explosive would have probably been the better choice. And yeah, it's mostly bouncing off, even on my relatively poor armor. Okay, I'm still getting him, but well, we've lost this one. But we've done what we could, and it was an entertaining battle. So, just reversing to dodge the shots from the Wyoming there. The Orion, she's a good ship. The high explosive preloaded means that things are getting a lot more interesting for destroyers around now, because even in lower tiers, for people who were trying to shoot armor piercing, battleship armor piercing at destroyers previously, you suddenly find these British ships all having high explosive loaded. So if you're in a destroyer, be very careful when you're facing one of these, even if it's an inexperienced players, because they have the right ammunition by default. Other than that, the armor piercing is disappointing. The high explosive can Citadel cruisers, so there's really no good reason to use it. Just stick with the HE, try to set fires, and you'll do well in this ship. So we'll see about the rest of the British line as I get through. Of course, I'm very keen, just for historical reasons, to go through the British ships, at least to the ones that actually existed. But we'll get to the end, don't worry. And yeah, all in good time. Anyway, that's it for today. Thanks, everybody, and I'll see you next time. Bye.